Hey, what's up, guys? This is Dion Brown. You are listening and or watching Man versus Brand. So I want to talk to you guys about um, what I've seen occur specifically in this post-pandemic, but we're still sort of in the midst of it, landscape, which is folks having the time and the want to pick up another language. We were inundated with so much free time that a lot of our work went to supporting children in developing new businesses that we wanted. There's also been a sector of individuals that said, hey, I'm going to use my time to employ platforms such as Rosetta Stone to support me in learning a new language. Now, what's interesting is that most individuals that have not traveled or that are not first, second, third generation of immigrants tend to elect for whatever their initial primary language is. Then there are the folks who really pursue language as a hobby, as a form of communicating in places that they have interest in, to get jobs, sometimes to build community. I remember a specific time where anime was large and everyone I knew was taking Japanese classes. It was the thing to do. I remember a time period where it was all about the romantic languages, right? People wanted to speak one of them, right? So I had a bunch of friends that took Italian. Some took French. Some, in fact, moved into like Portuguese. Some like Spanish. I was a person who elected to take both Japanese because I liked anime, and I took French for a very long time in high school and college, realizing at some point that the most I would get was directions to the bathroom in Paris and directions to where the hockey stadium was in Montreal. That was going to be my French thing. I never got the characters for Japanese quite right. So every time I meant to say love, I probably said mom. And that's okay because language is something that we have to use consistently in order for us to grow in it. We have to find community with applications, platforms, and speakers to help us. We have to remove ego and critique from not only ourselves, but from the people that we surround ourselves with. That'll help us to understand syntax, sentence structure, right? Because so much of what we learn in language isn't colloquial, it isn't how it's spoken. And so you're saying one thing, but your conjugation might be off, not because that's not the way you were taught it, but because that's not the way it's actually said. And so I am going to talk to Angèle Pretot. Close, close,
Close.
close.
Preto, but it's fine. Like,
Fine,
you know,
fine. Close,
as long as you have a link for people to find me, you can pronounce it any way you want.
We'll get that right in the show notes. We'll get that right in the show notes. And it's important, I think, that we have a conversation about language, but also I'm interested in having a conversation around the proliferation of unexpected language encounters. Because so much of right now language isn't driven by a lot of what I would discuss. A lot of it is being driven by YouTube videos and TikTok videos where people look one way, go to the culture that is dominant for the language that that person who looks one way really understands and is fluent in, and then watching that culture be baffled that that person can speak the language fluently. That is what has proliferated the social media space, right? Dion Brown, walk into a I walk into a restaurant. Um, the restaurant, I'm speaking Mandarin fluently. I don't give away that I understand how to speak Mandarin. I then start doing it. Everyone starts looking surprised. I then engage in that conversation. I record it for YouTube and TikTok. And everyone's like, wow, look at that guy. I didn't think he could speak that language. Look, he actually can, right? And so much of language is being driven in the non-academic, non-vocational world by this idea. There's also a ton of apps that are doing on the spot translations that could or could not be wrong. I speak into the app, I point it to the person, the app starts speaking to the person, and all of a sudden everyone understands what everyone else is saying. So we're going to talk about language, but not just about language. We're going to talk about language as it's being utilized today. The technologies that are allowing people to communicate with individuals through which they do not share the same language. And I also want to talk a bit about the difference between academic learning of language versus colloquial language, right? Like how many of us are going into places and we are speaking like robots, not because we intend to, but because we just don't understand the nuance and the cultural context of the language that we're attempting. So I'm Dion. That's Angel. Close?
Yep.
Close?
Very good.
Fine.
Perfect.
We're good with that. We're good with that. Okay. And we're going to talk about language right now. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Look, as you said, I'm Angel, and for anyone who doesn't speak French, you can call me Angel. That's totally fine. I am a French learning coach. That's my job. And in fact, I actually created that profession. I've been doing it for the past 6 years, almost 7 years, actually. That's when I started working exclusively online. And before that, I've been teaching French for over 18 years, which makes me feel pretty old, but you could say I'm experienced. I specialize in teaching French or helping English speakers learn French. It's typically, I wouldn't say it's harder for English speakers. It's just that they aren't practiced with learning languages until very recently. Actually, maybe until to this day, the school system in English-speaking countries just don't really care about foreign languages. Why? Because the rest of the world is busy learning English. As you can hear, I'm speaking English right now because I learned it while I was in France. And that's the case of pretty much everyone who's not a native English speaker. But it does happen actually pretty often that native English speakers do need to learn another language, be it for their profession, for their family. Sometimes they marry a French speaker or they move to a French-speaking country for any reason. Or for studying. I have a lot of clients also go to study in France. And then I help them do that because it's not very easy to pick up a second language, especially if it's the first time and you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, sometimes 60s. So I have honed English and French and exactly how you get from one to the other so that I can help people learn it as easily as it gets.
Got it. So there is science out there that says that, you know, when you're young, right, when you're in your toddler, infancy, through your elementary point in school, and life and age, that your brain, because it's still developing, has a stronger capacity to learn multiple languages. So it starts to get older. Our brain, through habit, right, sort of creates a rigidness in some of the ways that we interpret information, and are able to recall information, such as language, in a way that allows us to learn it easily. So, um, when you're deciding who you will coach, um, are you also considering how old or young the person is, and then really sort of figuring out maybe what some of their struggles will be, and kind of communicating that to them early on, so that if they're not quickly um, if they're not quickly learning the language, they don't feel discouraged. That they understand that a bit of this is about biology and not about how smart or how traveled someone may be. It's just that you're reteaching your brain how to learn something differently. Are you having those conversations?
I definitely consider this kind of struggle that someone may face, which are typically personal to the person. I would not say that age is a major factor, for one thing, because almost everyone of my client is older than 25. And we generally consider that after 25 years old, the brain is no longer, quote unquote, developing or growing.
Yep.
So there is definitely a less brain plasticity before the age of 25 than, no, less brain plasticity after the age of 25 than before.
Yep.
But I don't think it's like, in my experience, you just keep creating new pathways, new neural pathways for your entire life, especially if you're a learner. It will be easier for someone who has been learning their entire life, who's 60, than for someone who's currently 35 but hasn't learned anything in the last 10 years. So I would say age is one factor, or maybe not even a very important factor. Also, there's another thing that's very important to take into account regarding how it's easier for children to learn. I don't even know if that's true, but what's definitely true is that children have more space to learn, and they have less of a um, potential bad consequences that will happen if they make mistakes. Typically, it's like when you're a child, you're in the space where like it is the time of learning. You might still be stressed out for whatever reasons, but still, you do not have your life or the life of other people on the line. Like, some of my clients who are diplomats, for example, would find themselves in the situation where like you have extremely high stress related to your performance. So that's also why I insist so much in my practice on creating a safe space for people to practice, because you will not be able to learn if you don't have a situation that is conducive to learning. And in my experience, it's more about the situation and how supported you are than about your age.
Okay, so you're arguing that it's about the habits that you already had formed in your life and the
Yes.
environment that you are in that will be a stronger determiner than what's traditionally believed, which is age.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
That's true for languages. That's true for anything you want to learn. If you are a learner, you are in the habit of learning, it will be easier to learn anything else than another person who has not been learning anything recently.
Now, as a person of color, I would be disingenuous not to have the French versus francophone conversation, because
Right.
I think it's what's in my community, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I have friends who are African, friends who are Haitian, friends who are Canadian, friends, right?
Yes.
So when we talk about your path, your journey as a French coach, what form of French are you teaching? Are you teaching traditional French, or are you also catering it to maybe where that person, like you said, maybe a diplomat, maybe that person is working in Quebec, and so therefore they need to learn French, but it may not necessarily. There are slight deviations in that French from what would be traditional French from France.
Yes, that is an amazing question. I'm so glad you're asking it, because I almost never get it. And it's just so important. Like, it's so incredibly important. And that is where the difference between a teacher and a coach comes in. One of the way that the difference comes in. A teacher will be primarily focusing on the language, and they will teach a particular variant of it. So me being French, if I was focusing on just teaching, I would be teaching my native French that I have, which is, continental France, from Europe. I'm from Burgundy. So I would know like this kind of French. But with me being a coach, I focus less on teaching and more on helping people learn. And with that, I insist a lot on the importance of having immersion as part of your learning. I like to call that the daily French bath, just because it sounds more catchy than immersion. but basically it means a lot of listening and possibly reading if that's relevant to you, and watching videos and so on. And with that, you have to take into account what kind of French you need to be learning. So my clients definitely have to do with French from all over the world. I do have clients that are in Canada working with Quebec. I have people who are going to continental France in Europe. I have people who are going to Africa, for example, with charities. I have like doctors who have been to Africa and diplomats who have been to Africa, for example. And so for these people, I insist with them that it is very important that they listen to content that is created in the space where they are going to be operational.
Got it.
For the reason that if I was their teacher and they would mostly be speaking with me, they would get used to my French accent, and then when they would go back to Africa, there's a good chance that they just would not be able to understand the accent of the local, and it would be a complete failure on my behalf as a coach to not have prepared them for what they will actually meet in real life. So in order to avoid this, I work backwards, and I'm like, okay, what are your goals? With what countries, what kind of populations are you going to be in touch with? And then we look for the content that comes from these places and the kind of variants so they can get used to the accent, get used to the vocabulary, and so on. That's part of the holistic approach.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right, so when someone decides to not learn the language and then instead focuses on the proliferation of these apps, right, that allow you to speak one thing and then hold it up to a person and say that the thing says in the language whatever you are trying to communicate, right? Um, do you believe that there is a space where AI and learning can create communication broadening software where maybe I did work with you, Angel, and we were working on me and I was going to go to I was going to go to Haiti, and but there's just something that I don't know what to say. The person doesn't really understand me. I get the broad strokes. Now I'm utilizing this piece of technology to bridge the gap. Do you believe in that sort of technology? And do you think it's helpful for the culture of developing community with folks of different languages?
I think there is a space for this kind of technology, definitely. I've never witnessed a case of someone who has worked with me and then eventually decide to turn to an app. I
Okay.
witnessed the exact opposite case. I have people who are like, okay, I've been learning with apps for 2 years. I cannot speak a sentence. Help me out. That I
Yeah.
have a lot. Like it's often the first conversation I have with someone.
Yep.
So these apps, as you describe, I think they have a space. I think it's perfectly fine to use them if you're traveling. I wouldn't want to use them as a crutch. If you're a language learner and you're trying to learn the language, then go do your learning best you can. Don't rely on the app. However, if you're just traveling and you have no intention of learning the language beyond 2 or 3 sentences,
Yeah.
then it's great that you have an app to maybe speak with a local who doesn't share a language with you.
Yeah.
But I do really think that those apps are just destined to a larger public of mostly people who would just travel a little bit, probably travel to different countries with different languages. They won't have the time to learn each language, and that's totally fine. That can be your lived experience. That's not at all the kind of people that I work with, though.
Because what's interesting is, and to me, I think the future of it in its best way, right, it is, you're completely right, is when you're traveling, you're probably a short stay, you're going to China, that's not what you're going to commit your time to, but you want to get the best kind of local experience once you sort of exit the hotel to find directions and all of that. I think also maybe I was considering, and you may agree or not, is it almost becomes, remember when you had to hold a dictionary or you have to press the word in Google and then find the right way for it to pronounce it for you, that it then also can become I can't remember the term for architecture right now. I can now speak it, hear it, and then get an on-the-spot translation that I can now use. You know what I mean? Where like it starts to bridge that one thing that you can't figure out. Like, I'm trying to say, um, oceanfront. And
Right.
I'm saying the word by the ocean, but no one seems to understand what I mean because I'm trying to describe the property. Now I can speak into this app and say the word oceanfront. And then maybe it gives me, through AI learning, not by the ocean, but actually what that thing mean, what oceanfront is in that language. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
it becomes like a in the pinch support for someone who just can't quite get that word. Because I remember traveling and literally having I'm old. I'm old by my own admission. And having like a French English dictionary, right? And
I've done that too. I've gone to, I live in Vienna, Austria now, and the first time I went to Vienna, I had a little French German dictionary in my pocket.
exactly.
So
Right.
yeah, I absolutely remember
And
it.
then Google Translate becomes
Yeah.
another way, but that also can be a bit tricky because sometimes the translation isn't quite spot on because Google's
Yes.
also processing a lot of information in its algorithms. So I just thought it was interesting to think of those things as less like touristy and starting to really sort of almost be what the evolution of a Rosetta Stone would be, which is when you're in a moment that you need a phrase, you need a word, you need a conjugation that you can't pull, that maybe that thing can pull it from you. And instead of you use it to someone else, you're really using it to support your own learning. I don't
Yeah,
know.
that would have to be your last resort, though, because ideally you want to think of this ahead of time.
Got it.
So with the way that I work with my clients, that so first I try to design like where they're going, what are their goals, so that I get to teach them or they get to learn the kind of words that they need at this stage.
Got it.
Now, it won't work every time. I'm not gonna tell you it's a miracle solution. You'll know everything ahead of time. No, like there's no battle plan that survives for first contact with the enemy. You can prepare very well. That helps. Then, before you get into the situation of asking someone for a waterfront property, probably this same day earlier, you will
Yeah.
be thinking of it. You can visualize the conversation ahead and be like, oh damn, I don't know how to say waterfront. That's
Yeah.
when you want to use Google and just like make sure you have the right word,
Yeah.
because you could get into troubles relatively easily with those kind of tools if you don't have some space to prepare. Case in point, I like to tell the story of my father and the stripper. Because that was actually when I was in Germany. I was renovating a flat in Germany, and I was looking for a tool, and I knew the name of the tool only in French. And but in order to order this tool of Amazon, I would have to type it in German or in English. So I asked Google Translate what the name of this tool was, and according to Google Translate, it was a stripper. Then I like to do the next step to make sure I have the right one.
Yeah.
Type stripper in Google Image just to make sure.
Yeah.
And as you probably have guessed by now, the images you get from Google Image are not that of a tool.
Yes.
So I had to go back to the drawing board. Like, okay, like how do I, just
Yeah.
Googled around quite a bit until I found that it's a wallpaper stripper.
Yeah.
And and I wrapped that up by saying it's the story of my father and a stripper, but because that's when it hit me that as a kid I had seen my father with a stripper a lot, but of course I meant a wallpaper stripper.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
how you can easily, get into trouble with those tools if you're not preparing earlier. So I
Yeah.
recommend try to avoid these situations if you can.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, right? I think is also a conversation around um customs in a way, right? Like what's customary, right?
Yes.
Customary in terms of handshaking, in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how to greet people, in terms of defining the pronouns or the titles that you'll be using.
Right.
Specifically in business, just the way that business functions in that space may be slightly different. Right. So not only are you learning language, but you're also learning what is specific to that country and the way that they function. Right. And so to me, that's also the difference between a teacher and a coach is that
Yes.
coach is also maybe going to help you to connect not only the things that you're saying, but the actions that may need to go along with them. Right.
Yes.
So are you
Absolutely.
are you also working with your clients to talk to them through some of what you understand to be sort of culture? Like, some places it is quite rude to say no to being offered food or drink, right?
Mhm.
In some places, it's absolutely fine for you to make that determination on your own, right? And
Yeah.
so whether you close or don't close a deal may not be how well you grasp the language, but also in your understanding of what's being required from you in the communication itself. So are you having those conversations too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's absolutely part of my job. Now there are over 50 different French-speaking countries, so I cannot know what's customary in every single one, in every single also case, particular like parts of society or like in business or in diplomacy and so on in every single country. But with every new client, I increase my repertoire of things that I know. And for what I don't know, I tell people, okay, you might want to ask your colleagues for that, for example. But I insist a lot on politeness because it's more important to follow the rules of politeness than to know the language very, very well. Case
Yeah.
in point, I tell everybody that the most important word of the French language is bonjour, which means hello. It's not one of the most widespread words in the French language. In fact, all of the most widespread words in the French language are prepositions and are completely useless. Well, not useless, but not very useful for communicating.
Yeah.
But bonjour is the most important word. Why? Because if you go to France, you have to start every conversation with bonjour. Otherwise, you have rubbed the other person the wrong way and they won't be wanting to help you. And I think that's in large part why the reputation of the French people as arrogant come from. It's like if you start by not greeting them, you have lost before. Yeah, they'll be like,
That,
you
well, I
know,
was going to say that as a way of highlighting your point. You're really greeting them by saying good day,
yes,
right?
absolutely,
Which is equivalent to receiving something and not saying thank you, or
hmm
asking for something and not implying please, or
right,
if you can, right? And
hmm
so in a way you're greeting someone without greeting them, which means you're skipping politeness and nicety and moving on to the business at
right,
hand, which may create a sense of this person is coming off rude versus this person is wishing me well, even if they're not asking, how's your day? How are you
right.
doing? Blah, blah, blah. At the very least, you have acknowledged me and greeted me, and then we can move on in the conversation.
Yeah, you see, like, how are you doing is something I hear in almost every conversation here in the US because I'm currently traveling in the US.
Yep.
And it strikes me that it's not actually a question. Like, people don't want to really hear how you're doing. The actual answer, the proper answer is, how are you doing? Now, in France, we don't necessarily do that. We just say bonjour, bonjour, and, go on with our days. And there are other countries where you don't even need to greet anyone at the beginning of the conversation, most notoriously the German-speaking countries where I live,
Yeah.
and it's just like it's extremely ingrained the rules of politeness in people. For me, even having lived in a German-speaking country for the past 10 years, I still say hi or whatever equivalent in the language as soon as I meet someone and start a conversation, just
Well, yeah.
because I have to say bonjour. I cannot not say it.
So yeah, how are you doing is definitely for a lot of folks a greeting and less of a question. It's more transitional than
Yeah,
anything. Um, uh, uh, Mostly because there's really no formal way to greet. So you can be like, hey, you
hmm
can be what's up, it can be hello, it can be hi,
right,
but it's always oftentimes followed with how are you doing?
yeah,
The idea is that the person who's receiving it asks, gives a short answer, right? Then responds with how are you doing? That you get a short answer, and then you both move on to the matter at hand. What's interesting though, Angel, is that I think through COVID, and I imagine this happened in much of the world, asking things like "How are you doing?" or even greeting someone with "Good day," um, from a global perspective, people weren't having good days. People. It was less of people needed the space to communicate what was actually happening in their life, right? And so I think what's happened is that folks have also learned globally a bit more listening skills, right? Because the hey, hello also came with hey, how are you? Like, hey, what's going on? I'm I'm experiencing this moment right now, right? Or this thing is happening right now. Or did you see the news where this thing occurred? So small talk, I think globally, at least for a time, became a bit larger than small, where people were really discussing the state of the affairs in the world to virtual strangers, where maybe previously and in the near future they may not. And so I think it's interesting that you bring that point up, because I imagine in speaking to people, specifically in this sort of in that specifically in that more pandemic era, um, there's also new terminology that was introduced, right, around things like wellness, right, around things like COVID checking, right, like understanding the phrasing around have you been around sick people recently, and reading that or hearing that, where people didn't have to learn that before, but now it's a part of travel. It's a part of business. It's a part of entering a business. So how has your business changed in a way by the period of the pandemic, where conversation had shifted, and specifically in small talk, but also in a broader sense of being able to answer these sort of questionnaires type questions, where those questions weren't asked of anyone before, so no one was really prepared to do it in their native language, much less in another language.
Well, for me, I mean, I've been extremely lucky that I've been working online for the past 6 years. So when the pandemic hit, I was already, fully up and running.
Yep.
What changed is that, of course, within my coaching sessions, whether one-on-one or in group sessions, because I also have a group program, there was a lot more conversations around COVID and around what the regulations are. How do you talk to people about the regulations? I had one of my clients who was traveling a lot because she was in the process of moving from the UK to France at that point.
Yep.
And every week there was a new regulation. And I mean, at this stage, her French was very good already, but she was struggling just because the regulations kept changing. And sometimes even the staff at the airport knew the regulations not well, and she knew better because she was extremely on point with everything that was happening. She was traveling with a dog too. It was a complete nightmare. And then I've had, I don't know how many conversations with people who have asked me, what is the polite way to speak to people in order to smooth out these kind of conversations, because it's not just that you have regulations that you have to follow. You also have to communicate with people who might either not be aware or might just not be in a good mood, or I mean, you don't know what might happen.
Yeah.
Especially when you're traveling and there's a pandemic on top, and maybe your passport isn't the one they love to see, that happens as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've had even one thing that's great about for me having a group program where I have people from all over the world, and particularly people from the US and people who are living in France, even though they're not French originally, is that sometimes the students will answer each other's questions.
Got it.
And I love it, because I cannot know everything. I have a hard time enough knowing the regulations where I live. So, but they know for each other, and it's amazing to be able to facilitate that kind of space. It has been really helpful.
So when you're traveling the world, well, first, are you like one of those individuals who are just you just really love the French language, and then you happened to move into Germany, so you learned German, or are you like a polyglot, meaning like you just not just you learned these two languages, but that you are interested in multiple languages, um, uh, not only for your professional pursuit, but just because you have a strong love of language?
I definitely have a strong love of language. I return the question to you just before I can answer yours. How many languages do you need to be a polyglot by your definition? Because people have different definitions.
I mean, I always say several. So
So at least
several,
three.
several to me means three or more, right? So several to me means three or more, not including your native language. So technically, it would be four. So you would need to learn several languages. Several to me is three. Your
Or at least
language,
four.
yeah. So your what'd you say?
At least four.
Yeah. So several to me is three, right? And then plus your native language
Right.
would be considered four. So for me, if you know about four languages, then I consider you poly.
All right. I have six.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, definitely I make the mark. That's good.
All right, cool. So then let's go over those. So what languages are in your vocabulary?
So French is my native language, as maybe you can hear from the accent. English was the first one that I learned. In France, we have to study two languages at school. Doesn't mean everyone will eventually speak them, but I did manage to speak them. So those two were English and Spanish for me.
Okay.
Then I learned Portuguese when I was in between high school and college, just because I enjoyed it and I had met Brazilian people online. And at the time, I was like, oh yeah, sure, like let's learn another language just for fun.
Yeah.
And then I learned Esperanto, which is a constructed language, which is really interesting. It has a great philosophy and it's very easy to learn. I learned it within roughly a month. It's very, very easy to learn. It's 10 times easier than any other language.
And
And
Esperanto, before you is it derived from a particular language source?
not really. It was
Okay.
created by a Polish guy in the 19th century. A lot of the vocabulary is of Latin origin, but not all of it.
Okay.
And the grammar is very well constructed. That's what makes it easy.
Okay.
And so that was five. And then the sixth one is German. I tried to learn German for a very long time. I failed for a very long time. But after I have been living in German speaking countries, I eventually succeeded.
Perfect. So when you're out here in the world and you have six languages, right? Like, is aside from Esperanto, which I'm imagining what you're sounding like, it sounds like it's a bit niche. So you would probably find a community that
Yeah,
that speaks it, and you would speak it with them, and right. So there's some intentionality there.
right. Absolutely.
Um, and you mentioned offline that your girlfriend is of Latinx
Yep.
experience. So
Yep.
therefore, I would imagine that there is some space for Spanish being spoken. I do acknowledging that not everyone from a country has to necessarily speak that country's language because of things like immigration. Just because a person is something doesn't mean that that's where their country of origin is. My question though is do you find yourself practicing all six of the languages? So I gave you two caveats. One is Esperanto might be so niche that you have to intentionally speak it, and then you may have some possibility to speak Spanish on a consistent basis while engaging with your girlfriend. The French thing is there. Like, are you? What about Portuguese? Right? Are you finding yourself just like speaking Portuguese? Um, because you're taking trips to Brazil, because you have a part of your community that's Portuguese, or do you find that you have to intentionally find sources just to keep up with the language so that you don't lose it? Or at this point of having six languages under your belt, losing language isn't really a thing because your brain has been wired through habit to embrace language.
Oh no, they definitely get lost. I mean, at this stage, my Portuguese is absolutely rusty.
Okay,
But I'm not afraid of losing it because I know I can work it back up easily.
sure.
Also, with my experience being a coach and the experience with my clients, I'm just extremely confident about how fast it is to just rebuild a language to a previous level you had.
Yep.
Just because I have people who have studied French for 4 years, 20 years ago, and they come to me and they're like, "Oh, I used to speak French so well, and now I can't say anything." I'm like, don't worry, like give me 1 month, it's gonna be fine, So it's giving me a lot of security, of like feeling very secure about my language skills, even if I'm not practicing Portuguese at all. I haven't practiced for, I don't know, 2 years maybe. And Esperanto, you're absolutely right. I would have to go to a congress or to a particular group of interest to be able to speak it, or to speak it online.
Yeah.
So in my daily life, I mostly have four, and I mostly have English and French, because those are the ones that I intentionally chose to focus on those two. And then I live in a German-speaking country, so I will occasionally have to speak German, just to live. And my girlfriend is Mexican. She absolutely grew up in Mexico. She's a native Spanish speaker. We speak a lot of English and Spanish together. So yeah, but before I was with her, I was not practicing any Spanish. And, I met her and we started dating, and I just started trying to speak Spanish. It was a bit rusty at first, but now it's fine.
Okay.
So,
Controversial. Wait, controversial, provocative question.
Yeah, but you have to choose. I mean,
wait,
you
no,
can.
hold on. Anjo,
Sorry.
you have a child. You have a child, right?
I
What
have a child. No,
language is
I know
that?
I don't have a child. Sorry, I don't know where you heard that.
You said what?
What is your question?
No, I said provocative question. If
Yes.
you had a child, like if you
Or
have
if
a
I
child,
had a child.
yeah, if you had a child, what language are you teaching that child, considering that you both have each a primary language, you both also speak English, but for that child to flourish, they're in Germany, right? So what are you doing? Are you speaking one particular language at home and then allowing the child to learn German in school? Like what's the language? Because there's a spread of language out here right now. So
Right.
you have a child, let's say, what's the strategy, or have you even thought about something like that?
I have thought about it extensively, despite not having children, and that's not really a plan either.
Yeah.
But if I have to answer the question, maybe for someone who's wondering,
Yeah.
Typically how it's done in family that have several languages, it's totally fine to have one language for the father, one language for the mother, and one language for outside. Because the child can associate the language with a person or with a space. I know that some people try to do different rooms of the house, meaning you have to have a house as large as your number of languages. Or some people will have a nanny that's from another country, for example, so that adds a language. There are many ways to help a child learn a language. Typically, some people are afraid that it will be harder for the child to learn to speak if they have to separate languages. But the data around it, the science is really very encouraging, that it might take a little bit longer at the very beginning, but you don't care if it takes your kid a couple of weeks or month more if they get 3 languages instead of 1. Like, it's worth it.
Exactly. So you're out here, you're doing the podcast space. Are there very many podcasting opportunities in the languages that you speak to talk about your coaching opportunity that's not English? Like, are there sort of German podcasts that are where the audience may be interested in learning French, or possibly like a Spanish podcast where the audience is interested in learning French? So are you primarily speaking to an English speaking podcasting audience, or are there sort of a multitude of different languages where your service in French is valuable to their audience?
I haven't pursued that at all, to be honest, because I have really specialized in helping English speakers.
Got it.
I also do think that English speakers have problematics that are individuals to them, that speakers of other languages don't have. Just because if you're a speaker not of English, you probably have been exposed to a lot of English and have learned a lot of English, and then boom, you have 2 languages under your belt.
Got it.
It's a lot easier to learn your third language than it is to learn your second language, especially if you're young-ish. Like I was telling you, my clients tend to be I don't want to say that they're old. It's not nice, but if they're in their 30s, or late 20s even, it's already late to start learning your second language. And most people whose first language is not English will have already learned English by that age.
Got it.
And if they haven't, they will be a lot more interested in learning English than learning French. It's very rare, unless they're immigrants in a French-speaking country. But these are not the kind of publics that I work with.
All right. I'm going to ask you a question. It's meant to slightly be funny, slightly be true. And then I'm going to ask you some more questions about your preferred taste in in consuming media entertainment. So what are, because this is almost common in every language. So we're going to talk specifically about English speakers and French.
Mhm.
What are common phrases that people use when trying to use a French term that they are completely getting wrong?
Oh, too many.
Yeah, no, hit us with some, right? Hit us with
Okay, so the
that
worst
folks,
thing
that folks use
that's
that you're like, I know what you're trying to say in this moment, but that's not really the way that it's said. And almost I can tell that you're just throwing out a French phrase to throw out a French phrase. You haven't
yeah.
actually studied the language. So what are,
So
what are we getting wrong when we're just like abiento, or like, I don't know, like we're saying ça va instead of bonjour. I don't know, whatever that thing is. What are we saying that we think we know what we're saying, but we may not necessarily be saying what we intend to?
to start with the obvious, a few years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I don't know, there was a famous song that like was probably worldwide famous with the phrase "Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir?"
Yes,
And a lot of people learned it phonetically. And
yes,
if they meet a French person, they repeat it verbatim, not knowing what it means, just to
yep,
show they know some French. And like, maybe, but buy me dinner first.
yeah,
Or if I have a girlfriend, now I have a girlfriend, like she's not gonna agree to that.
yes.
Sorry. It's like,
Yes, it's
maybe like just
the
double
Moulin
check what
Rouge.
you're saying
The
before
Moulin
throwing it around.
Rouge made that phrase popular, super popular.
Yeah, it was a bad idea.
Yeah,
I get so many like propositions like that, and I'm just
got it.
really don't want to.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Okay. Um.
But I
Uh.
mean, there are a lot of like so-called false friend. I'm actually preparing a video about that. I want to call it the worst French false friend that will get you in trouble. I'm still collecting them because for me, they don't stand out to me. I have to wait until someone says it to me and like, oh no, doesn't mean what you want to say. So for example, we have the verb exciter. So
Mhm.
typically I teach that if you have a word that ends with ed in English and it looks like a Latin word, it goes vowel, consonant, vowel, you have an equivalent in French that often ends with a. So in English you have excited and in French you have excité. Unfortunately, it doesn't actually mean the same thing.
Yeah.
In English, it's something that's totally fine to say that you're just excited about something, but in French, it means you are aroused.
Yeah.
So, and it's never. I mean, it's a good thing if you're like super sex positive, but
Yeah.
it's never really a good thing to throw around just out of the
Like to
out
say
of
to
the blue
someone,
like
"Oh
that.
my
Just
God, I
don't do
got
that.
a kid," and you're like, "Thank you, I'm excited." You want to make sure you're using the right form of
Right,
the word
right. So if
excited.
you want to say I'm excited in French, say j'ai hâte instead. It means I look forward to it. That will
Yeah.
be a lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah. What about the space where folks clarify for the folks that are listening the difference in marriage, single, and whether that still matters anymore, right? So I know a lot of folks that are like, mademoiselle, right? Or madame, or monsieur, right? Like, and
Mhm.
they're throwing it kind of around
Right.
um, as just as just a way of like being cool. Like,
Hmm.
I don't know if that makes sense, but like,
Yeah,
what
it does.
is that really used anymore? Like, do people really care about whether you're married or not? Because here it doesn't really hold weight in the same way. It's kind of like the Mrs. versus Miss
Right.
um, is is I think has less weight than it did at one point, where cultural nicety was about acknowledging single versus married. So does it
Hmm.
really have that sort of same cultural significance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's not an easy question to answer.
Okay.
And very often I have to say, like, I don't really know
Okay.
because I know that the state of things that it used to be that if you're not married, you're mademoiselle.
Yeah.
And if you're for a woman, and if you're
Yeah.
married, you're madame.
Yep.
And a man is monsieur, even if he's 4 years old, which when I was a kid, I was like, that's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is changing very slowly. I know that at some point the official paperwork has scratched the mademoiselle option just because they were like, okay, it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
You're even going to be addressed with male gender or female gender because in France they haven't caught up with non-binary yet. It's extremely that conversation is extremely difficult in the media, and it's a disaster. Honestly, they're so far off.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are, I think, very old school and will still use mademoiselle even if it's not really official anymore.
Okay.
So the answer is I don't know, and that circles back to what we were saying with the context of where you're going to interact. You just have to ask the people on the spot and like what is their preferred way to be addressed, for example.
It's like their preferred pronoun, basically.
Yes, except the pronoun conversation in France, they're like, oh my god.
Yeah,
it is difficult.
Walking up to being like, hey, what's your preferred pronoun? It's like, how would you like to be addressed?
Yeah, would you like to be addressed as well? If you know that a woman is married, then there's no question. But if you know that she's not, then you can ask her or talk to people with their first name. I don't know.
All right, one more, and then we'll get to the what you consume. What is the actual? Because I've had this conversation with people who, some who speak French, some who speak francophone or French in other languages. What to you is the true determination of formal versus informal when you're deciding on noun usage for other people? Like, when do you do, like, is it relationship? Is it age? Is it respect? Like, if I'm talking to you, when do I decide to use formal tenses and formal pronouns versus when I get to use the more informal pronouns and more informal language choices?
Right. So that's a really complex question. In fact, there are memes online with like these 3 choices where you have like all the like options like go, but there's a hack for French, thank God. So the hack is you say vous, you use formal with everyone until they tell you to use tu.
Got it.
And that will be the best way to make sure you won't run into some troubles, because it's if you say vous to someone to whom you should say tu, unless if it's a child, like if it's a child under 10, just go ahead and say tu right away, right? Because they won't understand if you say vous to a young child. They'll think you speak to several people. They will be confused. But if it's an adult, just use vous. And if it was a tu situation, they'll just laugh a bit in your face, be like, just like say tu, but it won't damage the relationship, right? So use vous until they tell you to say tu. It might be right away. It might be 2 months, 2 years, never down the line, but you'll be fine.
That's like saying Mr. Brown, which is my last name, and I just say, just call me Dion. And exactly. I'm saying you have earned the right to become a little more relaxed in the way that you're addressing me, because we have built relationship, or we're in an informal space where that thing isn't necessary.
And it's the best way to make sure that you won't be offended. Like, there used to be a rule that if it's online, you say tu to everyone. Yeah. And I've had situations literally in the YouTube comment sections of my video where people would start commenting angrily in French, and I would say tu to them because it's the way of speaking to people online, and they would just go back to me like, you don't say tu to me. Yeah. Okay, fine. How about I delete your comment? But
Exactly.
So yeah, say vous. Like, if you have any doubt, just use formal.
All right, cool. Thank you for that. All right, so 2 questions I ask of everyone. I am interested in your answers because maybe your answers are available to us on Netflix or in our podcast streams, or as a book that we can read. So on any streaming platform, podcast or book, what's something that you've recently engaged with that you thoroughly enjoyed?
Astrology.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was a complete non-believer until I was over 35 years old. I'm now 37. Yeah. And just at some point, I discovered Hellenistic astrology, which is the astrology as it was practiced in the Roman Empire. And it struck me as, if you can really read it, it's extremely accurate and it can be very helpful. And I think it's a pity that most people know only what I knew when I was young, which is, the stupid horoscope.
Yeah.
horoscope with like inverted commas that you find in a magazine, and that's not astrology. That's pop culture. It's different.
Got it.
So
So it's
yeah,
uh,
Hellenistic astrology. Yeah.
Hellenistic astrology. All right, cool. All right, so second question is on any streaming platform, podcast, or book. What's something that people in your community, people that know you, may not know that you're interested in, but you thoroughly enjoy?
Let me think if I can find something fancy.
Most of the answers end up being like horror, sci-fi, mini golf, um, podcasts, like murder podcasts. It ends up being like most of the stuff ends up being sort of funny, but then you got people that are just like, I love, black and white comedies from
Right.
like the 50s of a particular genre or a particular director. So it's whatever you like.
All right, I got one. It's pretty hard because I share a lot about myself on,
Oh,
like, I make so much content. But historical fashion, I'm
okay.
pretty sure I've never shared about that, and it's something I really enjoy, and I enjoyed my entire life. So yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Well, listen, Angel, I appreciate your time. Why don't you tell people where to find your information? I'll also have it in the show notes. But for anyone listening or watching right now, where can they get your content and where can they find your coaching services?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It was amazing being here. You can find me at frenchfluency.net. That is my website. So you'll have the services on the website. And then I'm at French Fluency on almost every platform, YouTube, TikTok. No, actually not YouTube. Instagram, TikTok, um, Facebook. And
Okay.
then I'm Angel Pretot on LinkedIn. You can always connect with me. I'm happy to connect. And on YouTube, it's Angel Pretot, the French coach.
All right, awesome,
Yeah.
man. So I'll have that all for you guys in the show notes for this episode. Thank you so much for joining us, for imparting all this knowledge. Guys, take a moment, figure out if this is what you want to do. So many folks come into the new year, into new time periods, into birthdays, saying that they want to learn a new language. Now you have a source to do just that. So take
Yep.
advantage of what you hear and like on the episode. Thank you guys so much for continuing to support the channel. I love you all. Have a great night. Bonne nuit. Bye.
Bonne nuit.